The following thoughts on Happy Hour do not represent Cox Media Group or its sponsoring. Anything you hear may and will be used against you. Thank you. Voted as best local podcast in Tampa Bay by the Creative Loafing. You're listening to Happy Hour.
Are you feeling classy today? Sit down, pour a glass of wine, and listen to Happy Hour.
You're tuned in to Happy Hour, an hour where Happy rants about something. Sit back and listen in. Happy Hour is on now. Happy Hour is on now.
What up? What is happening? This is Happy Hour. I am your host, Ryan Hoppy. And on the phone line, he is the one and only Dale Dudley from the legendary Dudley and Bob Show on KLBJ FM. Dale Dudley is live on Happy Hour. What's up, dude?
Man, that's a lot of energy. It's actually the Dudley and Bob with Matt show now. If we don't add his name in, he'll be pissed off. So, what's happening?
Nothing much, man. How honored are you to be live on my podcast, man? Because we've been talking for probably 16 months now, and you've given me so much advice over the years that I'm pretty pumped to have you on the show.
Oh, well, thanks, man. You need to choose better heroes.
Right? But, I mean, you've helped me out so much during the downtimes and the uptimes, so to have you even call into the show means a lot as a guy who's trying to make his way into this tough business.
It's a very tough business, and it's gotten tougher over the years, and I feel sorry for young people who dream of doing it because it's not like it used to be. Certainly not breaking in is not like it used to be. They used to need someone all the time to press buttons on overnight shifts, and they don't need that anymore. So it's a tough road.
What are some things that young adults like me need to do to make ourselves be seen, especially since the jobs are becoming more fleeting in this business?
Are we just talking the radio business or all media? Or
I guess all media, but especially radio. Like, what do we need to do to make ourselves show up since there's so many few jobs now? Well,
I think the one thing that it's always been true, even when there were many more jobs, is never say no. And I see that all the time. I've had interns, that had the potential to become employees, and I've had employees who, have said no to things like working holidays and working overnights and to run shows, and that's one thing that even back in the day that it never crossed my mind to say no because I realized that it was an opportunity, and so I worked, many Christmas mornings and New Year's mornings and Christmas Eves, and of course with automation, that's not necessarily an on-air thing now, but whenever an opportunity arises. The one thing you don't want to do if you're in an internship or anything else is ever say no to the opportunity to get your foot in the door, and you never know when that's going to come. So that's advice number one, and number two is to make yourself go above and beyond the task. For example, if I have interns who answer the telephone and an intern comes in with some sort of contest idea or pitches something to us, even if it never gets on the air. I always remember the kids that, gave you ideas. And we have several of them working at our station now who were my interns. As a matter of fact, I think it's my show. We have 7 stations, and I think my show has created more long-term employees than any other show. I may be wrong on that, but pretty much when I walk through the building, I see a lot of my former interns as employees.
How often do you see these interns that just come in, Dale, and they expect to get on air right away? Because those are the interns that bring a bad name to my generation, the millennials, when they come in and they act entitled. So how often do you see that?
I used to, the way I do my show is an ensemble anyway. So, I've never had an issue with someone getting on the air. I tend to interview my interns to see if there's anything there that we can use a spark or use them in a contest. It's different now. There was a time when we could have an intern, and the intern would literally just be somebody who loved radio and would come down. I think I had one intern who's out in Los Angeles now. He's an actor, And I think he may have interned for me probably illegally for 2 years, because he would just come in most days, and he became a good friend. And I tend to use that as an ensemble. Our show is extremely chaotic, and it's all about the drama of the people. We haven't played a record on the air except in special circumstances since 1993, and so it all works out for me. Now I have had to tell people, okay, your mic time is over. I've even had to, friends of mine who've come in and suddenly they warm up to the microphone. I don't really have a problem with it now because my interns are in another room answering the phone, and usually their mic time is only if I call them in. So it's not really an issue that I run into, and if it is, we make it part of the show, and we'll say, hey, you're being a mic hog, get out of here. So it's not a matter of somebody getting in the way, as more it is just adding to the drama.
What is the key to knowing how to share the mic time in a good way? Because do you guys have hand signals, or is there a way you can read people's faces, like if Bob wants to say something or Matt? Is there a way you can tell if they have something to say?
Well, we've definitely developed hand signals over the years. I mean, you're dealing with, I come from a comedy world. I originally was into radio and then did stand-up comedy for a little while in the early 80s and became friends with a lot of those up-and-coming comics back in the day. And so I've always had comics as guests, and now Matt Bearden is a professional stand-up comic who's just happened to be on the show now for 6 years. And we tend to think in the way of punchlines. And Bob, excuse me a second, I've been home from school today, not feeling well. But Bob Fonseca also, over the years has picked up those skills. So we do have hand signals. If somebody's got a great line, we'll try to get the other people's attention to send it back that direction if we think it's a great line. But we do have a tendency to talk over each other, which is, a complaint that program directors and people have had over the years. But you know what? That's what conversation sounds like. If you're at a party or if you're with your 4 or 5 buds, there tends to be interruptions and there tends to be a crosstalk. And in the world of the rating system we are now, you want constant sound anyway. But we don't have a real problem with. I mean, the biggest problem we have is oftentimes we think of, especially Matt and I, we think of the same joke, and I'll be in the middle of the setup of the joke, and he'll blurt out a punchline, and I'll yell joke stealer because we tend to think along the same twisted kind of lines.
So then when a joke is taken by Matt, how do you get up and move on and keep on with the segment? Does it ever throw you off, or is it something that you get?
I yell joke stealer. That's the thing. We just do natural reactions. I can't stand canned fake radio. It's just not in my system. It's just something I can't do. I realized many years ago, I realized I was a terrible disc jockey, and then I listened to morning shows that were structured and had bits and recorded bits, and I tried that for a while and realized I wasn't very good at that. And I'm also kind of lazy, and I don't want to spend all my time in a production room. And so I just kind of set it up like it's a play every morning. I tell my bosses all the time, and they've got me doing the second show now on a news talk station, and I said, the issue with your radio station is not that is that your audience is getting older, and also that there's no drama here. There's no drama over here for anyone 25 to 54 years old to tune into on that particular station. So I make it part of whatever we're doing is just really what's happening in the room. That's why I've always laughed at trolls over the years who've written and said, oh, they script all that stuff out.
Yeah.
There's nothing we script out. Like, for example, we all took the day off today because we're all suffering from some sort of illness, and we'll come in tomorrow, and Carissa, who is our assistant producer, who tends to be very dramatic and full of hypochondria, her disease will be much worse than my strep throat, and that's just the way we play. We let the listeners know exactly who we are, so they're listening in on the personality. I think if there's a criticism of my show myself is that it's very hard for a new listener to catch up and figure out who everyone is on the show.
And when it comes to the radio consultants that you were saying before, what is some of the weirdest advice that they have ever given you? Because I've talked to a lot of guys in radio, and they tell me that radio consultants sometimes give some really bizarre advice.
I feel the same way about radio consultants as I do preachers. They're shit salesmen with a mouthful of samples. Any radio consultant that I've ever talked to, and I haven't had a consultant since the early 90s, and that's when we first went talk on a rock station. And I remember getting yelled at on the phone by a guy I'd never met, and I said, I'm not doing this again, and if I do this again, and this is back before I had children and a responsibility, and I thought I was a badass, and I thought I was the Stern of the South, and I said, I'm not ever doing this again, and if I do, I'll just go to another market. Now that's not a possibility. Now I'm kind of like the big fish in a little pond, and the pond got bigger. I'm very lucky in that case, but consultants who are especially consulting a morning show are the guys who never made it in mornings, and if they did, they didn't make it for very long. And I always feel sorry because I see people in my own building that have had to deal with consultants, and I will quietly whisper to them and say, just go through the motions. But the funniest, it's actually that same meeting that I can think of was Seinfeld was very popular in the 90s, and Bob and I were trying to do a show that was basically the same thing, where people are just coming in and busting balls, and the show wasn't ever about really anything. And we had a consultant on the phone, and he's going, what is this? This is a mess. You can't just do this. And I go, well, yeah, you can do it. There's a guy in New York who's been doing it very successfully, and we're trying to be like, more like Seinfeld. Seinfeld was just super hot at that time. It was the year that it really took off. And the general manager jumps up out of his chair. There's a guy on a speaker. The general manager jumps up out of his chair, and he goes, "You're not Steinfeld." And we knew then that we were onto something, because we were making this new general manager crazy, and we were making some guy in Los Angeles crazy who thought he knew how to do mornings. And that's really the last time we met with a consultant. Now, I've been really lucky since then to have program directors who get it and learn how to just let you do what you're going to do. And actually, will take the heat for you when people are pissed off, and will keep you sheltered from any kind of, day-to-day criticism that goes on.
Now, since you are a very outspoken show and you guys say it like it is, sometimes that comes with outrage where people get mad. So have you ever had anything happen with, like, bad crap crazy fans?
Oh, dude, day before, yesterday morning, a guy was angry with, there's an abortion, the state of Texas is trying to basically block abortion through all sorts of weird ways. The hardcore right-wingers are trying to defund Planned Parenthood through Medicaid and everything else. And we were talking about the ridiculousness of it, because they're using that movie that's been faked and all this other stuff. And we touched on it a little bit, and because I had mentioned it on the afternoon show the day before, and we moved on from it. And we had a caller that literally called up, and you could hear the fire coming out of his mouth, and he was like, y'all just talking in circles. Y'all don't know what you're talking about. And we go, what do you mean? Well, tell us what we didn't cover. And he goes, well, all of it. And I go, well, give me in particular, what have we said that was wrong? And this went on for about 3 or 4 minutes. I finally lost my temper, and I said, sir, you're not a very smart man, are you? And he said, he just literally blurted out Obama at one point. Well, when you talked about Obama, I go, we never talked about Obama. And it escalated, and I'm not afraid to take people on when it escalates. I mean, I know that most people out there are, if you give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves. And I said, you're just not a very bright guy. You're just not. And he goes, well, then I'll come down there. I'll meet you in the parking lot. And I'm like, wow, this guy's really that angry. And those are callers, and of course he didn't come to the parking lot. And that's happened, once or twice a year, if not more. It's now, because of the internet, people think that their opinion is important, and everybody's opinion is important, but now people believe they're part of the process of if you piss them off, that there's some sort of payment you have to have, which is ridiculous. It's an entertainment show. But then you have the actual mentally ill, and we've seen a real rise in that. We've completely changed our lobby. People used to just come in, drop off food, come back and see us. And over the past 2 or 3 years, the mentally ill who have come into the radio station and rushed the doors and tried to open the hall to the studio. We had a guy come in one day trying to open that door, which is closed, with a giant magnet. And then we've seen that really, really escalate up until last summer. Not this current summer that just ended, but the summer before that, I had a credible death threat from a gentleman who we'd made angry on the air about 3 or 4 weeks earlier, and he'd really stewed over something, and he made a terroristic threat towards everyone's station, but mostly me, and that involved getting the SWAT team and involved police escorts for a couple of weeks, and so I've moved, and we've changed our, my house isn't listed under my real name or anything like that. So yeah, it's really escalated over the years. We've had some craziness.
How nervous do you get when this happens? Like, how immediately did you change the name from your house? Because you're a pretty big figure in that city. So was it one of those things where you changed everything right away?
Well, no. The good news is that one of my best friends, oddly enough, me, a former druggie and a former shock jock, my closest friend in Austin is the police chief, Chief Acevedo. So I wasn't too worried about that. And, usually the people who make those threats aren't the ones you need to worry about. It's the people that think you're talking to them personally who really are mentally ill, and need some help. Those are the ones you have to worry about, the ones that actually will just show up. It's usually not the other ones. So I was concerned about it just because I have kids, and we took some precautions, and we were building a house anyway. And so when we moved into the new house, we just have it in the name of a trust. And I don't even get my mail here. I get my mail at a post office box, and that's the world we live in now. I mean, that's it for anybody who's in the public eye. And I'm, like I said, I'm just in this this one big town. So it's kind of weird. It's kind of a weird life.
And going back to everything where people get mad online, why do you think people have to go the route of fake outrage? Because I've seen you go back and forth online via tweets, and these people get so mad over words, dude. And it just seems like each and every day, this whole thing of fake outrage and wanting people to say they're sorry is getting worse and worse. Wouldn't you agree, Dale? Yeah,
I agree, but I also think that it's, you've probably noticed I haven't been on Twitter very much lately because I used to get on Twitter and troll people who had ridiculous opinions like the tea, and I did it for sport. And then I'd wake up the next morning after a few drinks and go, oh, my God, what did I tweet? And I'm like, it's not safe for a radio personality to be out there constantly jawing and tweeting with people, and by safe I mean your job, because you never know when you're going to type and write in the thing that I think a lot of people, a lot of America now thinks that Twitter outrage is such horseshit, and they're getting to where they're not. I love that it's becoming less and less. It's the companies that pay attention to it, that have to at some point go, well, okay, you're mad, so what? You don't give blood, you don't. We're human beings. We all say and do wrong things, and just because, like the guy from Atlanta the other day who called some chick Tits McGee on Twitter. I mean, the guy he probably knew better, but maybe he's having a couple of drinks after the game or something like that and forgot the tweet. But does the guy really need to lose his job? Is an apology not enough?
Yeah.
And why should you even have to apologize? I mean, I think Matt Bearden on our show has a great saying. He says, being offended just means that you're not a mature person, regardless of what you're being offended about. Because let's say somebody offends you because of your sexual proclivities or your lifestyle. Well, then you're obviously talking to a bigot. So why are you getting offended at what a bigot says? You know, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, it's infuriating. But I'm on Twitter less and less. I'll go back once in a while to post something or to read a few posts, and I'll read like 4 or 5 good things, and then go, okay, stop scrolling, because you don't want to read you don't want to. And I have a horrible tendency to want to argue with people who are who don't like me, and I'm trying to get away from that, because it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. I think the internet is probably, the most unnatural thing that was ever happened to humans. Why you never were supposed to argue with a guy in Montana or a guy 7 miles away, because you never were going to meet him anyway.
Yes.
So.
Because they would never say it to our face, Dale. I'm not like this huge public figure, but when I worked for Rover, all these guys would talk so much smack. But what I love, Dale, is when you meet fans in person, not one time do they come up and spew the hate that is said on Twitter, because they're hiding behind a keyboard like pussies, where they would never say it to us. Don't you agree?
No, I've actually got a guy. It's pretty funny. His life is very sad, and he thinks years ago this guy had been on one of our bus trips or something, and one of the female employees was uncomfortable, and he was scheduled to come in and sit in what we call the audience of one, and I had denied it a couple of times or something. And he's a hater listener, and you may have read my tweets the other night. I was having a few drinks, and I realized he had unblocked me, and he's really obsessed with me. He thinks I'm a horrible human being, and says, and I want to get him on the show because I think it'd be a great character, a guy who listens to your radio show, but he can't stand you. And I'd love to have him on. And we invited him on. He won't come on. And I read online the other night. He said, because I never would meet with him one-on-one off the air, which I'd be happy to do. And then I found out last year that he was at our Halloween party, but he never came up and said hello to me or anything else. It's this really weird, intimate thing that he's got going on. And no, in general, they don't. I mean, in general, I'm doing this show on this AM station. It's just an hour in the afternoon, and I always get the caller that goes, "Well, I don't agree with you on very much." They feel the need to let you know that they have a difference of opinion on whole, but they'll call up when they agree with something. But they got to let you know that 90% of the time. And they'll do that sometimes when you meet them in person. But I've never had somebody come up to me and, let me think about it. I'm trying to think if anybody's ever come up. I've had drunks come up to me at bars before and say something, but that's been years ago. And in general, I was getting my oil change yesterday, and I could hear the guy saying my name and saying the call letters, and I couldn't tell whether it was positive or negative. And I get really uncomfortable, too, because I'm not comfortable with any kind of local celebrity. I think local celebrity's kind of hacky. But yeah, in general, they don't come up and say the mean stuff. It's web warriors and keyboard conquerors.
Damn right.
And I've done it. I mean, I've gotten on news sites and written things, and said things to people. I don't know. I think that's human nature, though. Because you're right, if we look at people face to face in general, and like that guy that called the show the other day, if that guy had come down to the station, I think by the time he had pulled in the parking lot, forget security, you're not going to be angry anymore, I had a guy berate me in a parking lot a couple of weeks ago. I accidentally tagged his car with my door, and it didn't even do any damage, and he just kept talking, and I was really mad for about a week. And I've still thought about sending him, one of those glitter bombs. But at some point, you just go, I mean, what's the purpose,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the show that you do in the morning and then your new afternoon show? Like, what's the difference between the content and, like, the people that listen as well?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know, how long the new thing will last. It's really just a test. It's a news talk station, and I think they knew I could be a bit political, so they've put me on it, and it was a completely right-wing station. Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity at one point, Glenn Beck at one point. I think they even had Michael Savage on years ago, Dr. Laura, and they've seen their numbers dwindle over the past couple of years significantly in the 25 to 54-year-old audience. So they brought me over, and I mean, right now I'm softballing it. I'm coming in and I'm trying not to hit them over the head with a hammer. The first couple of days I had nothing but angry callers because it's really hard for me to come out of Rush Limbaugh and not call bullshit on the things that he says. So I'm now coming in with things that are a little bit more local and softer and getting my audience over there, and then eventually I'll start hitting them over the head with a hammer. But it's a news talk station, and, you know, and on my show in the morning I have these long 30 to 45-minute sweeps of talk, and then we'll do a big block of commercials. This is more of 9 minutes and then commercials, and 8 minutes and then commercials, and the news at the bottom of the hour. So it's a real adjustment. You get maybe 2 or 3 phone calls in there, and I've got a former intern. Going back to your original thing, my former intern, Eric Alderati, is my producer, and I leave the mic on, and he's my sounding board right now. So it's just kind of an experiment. We're kind of seeing where it goes. There's no numbers yet. We won't see for, you know, probably. We'll just have to see where it is at the end of the fall. But it's definitely interesting trying to do split shifts in radio.
What do you do in between once the morning show is over with and the afternoon show is over with? I mean, do you ever get burnt out, or is it one of those things where since you love radio so much that you're just in the zone?
No, I'm absolutely burned out. I mean, you know, there's I'm trying to figure out whether to come home and sleep, and then Monday, Wednesday, we also do a podcast. So Monday, Wednesday, I've pulled myself off the podcast on Tuesdays and Thursdays so I can come home and rest a little bit before I go back in the afternoon. And it's not bad. I mean, the hour goes by. It's the traffic. It's going another 25 miles back into town, and we're trying to. I think if the thing expands or does pull any numbers, we're eventually talking about me having an office there with some way to crash or something like that. But dude, I've been doing it a really long time, and I can't. It's still in my blood. When I'm on the air, especially in the morning, and it's going well, and the whole cast is there, there are moments of zen where I just go, I can't believe that I arrived, and I'm finally. And I know I'm doing good radio. I mean, in the '90s when we were doing radio and just being filthy and throwing things against the wall to see if they would stick, and trying to out Howard and be outrageous. It was fun, and I would love to do that again. But now, being intelligent. Still sophomoric, but talking about your family and things that really go on. I've got a much younger wife, and I got young kids, and I'm 54, and being able to, and then when you just get in the zone where you're knocking it out of the park, and we don't get people that call up anymore and go, hey, you guys suck. I mean, people are just complimentary, and now when I'll go out and I'll be walking through Costco or wherever, and I'll get, people just go, hey, love you, love the show, which is a catchphrase. It's an old man cow catchphrase. I abhor man cow. That's another story. But his phone screener used to tell people to call up and say, love you, love the show. So as a joke, over the years ago, we said you have to say, love you, love the show. And so people do that. I was getting dinner for the kids last night. My wife and I were both getting sick, and I had 2 or 3 people come up at the bar here in this small town I live in, and it's weird because when you're younger and you're cocky and you think your shit doesn't stink, and you don't realize that people are behind your back going, what a dick, and I did that, and then I was honest about that, and then I was honest about my drug use, and then I was honest about my divorces and my mental illness, and now I'm at a place where we literally will knock it out of the park sometimes 3 or 4 days out of the week, and even the bad shows people say they love, and then you get people anywhere from 22 years old to 45, 50 years old coming up to you going, love you, love the show. So I do have those moments of zen, but then there's also the fact that you're stressed out with the kids, you're tired, and there's times, and I think I think I'm on the air a little too much, and that's something I'm going to go back to the bosses and talk about. And there's times where you just want to be anonymous and get away, and it's a weird life. I mean, because outside of the city limits here, no one knows who the fuck I am.
Yeah.
So the minute you come back in. And then also, without advertising in radio in general, 99.9% of the people here don't know who you are. So the ego part of it goes, man, I wish it was, more. It's a weird deal because, the ego is, when you're in this business, and it's tough for people to realize this and admit it, the ego is the one getting the strokes. Because I think everybody in show business, all the way down from actors to radio, are in it because they are lacking in something they didn't get at home. And I know that's true for me. I did not have the attention of my father, and my mother was an alcoholic. And I was telling my wife the other day that I just sometimes don't want to be Dale Dudley. I don't know who he is until I'm home with her and the kids. So it's a really weird life. I don't know if I answered your question. I may have went way too far into the psychosis of it all. But no, I still absolutely, when I'm in there with Matt, with the best cast I've ever had, which is Matt and Bob and Carissa and Daniel, that's the best cast we've ever had. We all get along. Nobody's looking to do their own show. There are moments where I go, man, you got to take this in and enjoy it because it won't last forever. And that's when I give myself credit for actually doing it, knowing that I did a good radio show.
Dude, you just brought up a point that I've never thought about. When I was a kid, I was made fun of probably until high school, and I was never good at sports, and I'm 6'8", but I've always loved radio, so I think it's sort of me trying to overcompensate for not always fitting in when I was younger. And it seems like you did the same thing with your dad not accepting you. So what is the key to finding true happiness while being yourself on air? Because this is something that I'm just thinking about right now.
Well, are you looking? You're going to have to rephrase the question. Happiness while you're on the air, or true happiness?
I guess true happiness in general, because I never thought about it that way, that when you're in radio, that you're trying to overcompensate because of your shallow ego.
I think that you don't get there until you're actually honest with yourself about your limitations and honest with yourself about what you've done. I could beat myself up pretty badly when I think about that I didn't make it to the major markets that I wanted to. But if you look at it on whole, to be able to be in the same chair for 29 years, I mean, I could go either way because I could go, wow, I just sat here for 29 years and I was lazy and scared. I can do that. But then there's a part of me that says, I sat here for 29 years and every other person I knew that was in the business who continued just to play records is now gone. They're gone. Yeah. They're not in the business. And so I can give myself credit for taking a chance and doing a talk show and having it work, and not just work, having it continue to work even through the down times, and then reviving it when it was almost gone in 2010. So, listen, when you're 54, dude, you realize there is never a moment in your life, both professionally and personally, where you go, I've arrived. I won the lottery.
Yeah.
I just missed out on a huge investment that I could have done that would have given me a lot of money, and I had some friends that did it and got a lot of money, and I've been beating myself up about it. But in reality, that wouldn't have got that money would have come in. It would have been wired in, and we would have gone on vacations, and I probably would have walked away from radio, and then I would have gotten bored, and then something else would happen. The movie Boyhood is a great example for that. Richard Linklater. I'm watching that movie, and I didn't enjoy the first 40 minutes because every actor that walked on the screen was a friend of mine, and I was like, why didn't I get that part? Why didn't I get that audition? And then the movie kicked in, and at the end of that movie, where Patricia Arquette is sitting alone at a table and she starts crying, her kids are going off to college. You look back on the rest of the movie and you go, life is happiness are little slices throughout life. So those moments when you're on the air and it's a moment of zen, and you you did a good break, or you did a great quarter hour, or somebody wrote you and said, you guys got me through cancer treatments, or I'm going through a divorce and all I had to listen to were you guys in the morning, and I don't think those are the moments. They're little slices. There's never a place where you land at the end of the rainbow, both in real life or in show business. And I think the people who end up being the least happy, and I know I've been that way, I had to have an attitude adjustment just last June where I was just getting really bitter about the business, and I have a great operations manager who pulled me into his office and said, look, dude, and made some sense, and so that's just it. It's little moments. Rarely is it one big pot of gold.
Dude, how flattering is it when you're out at an event and somebody comes up and says how they listen to your podcast while driving a truck or doing their pizza job? Because I'm getting that a lot down here in Tampa because I have an app. And I'm having kids my age say that they are now listening to talk radio because of the place I work at, 102.5 The Bone, or because of my side podcast. Like, to me, dude, that means the world to me, because if it's not for the people who listen to our podcast, then we're just a bunch of babbling dudes talking into a microphone. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, what's freaky for me is I'm an extremely shy person off the air, and I have trouble. One of the reasons I didn't finish doing stand-up, and I was friends with, Bill Hicks was a friend of mine, and I've been friends with comics over the years. T-Sean Shannon used to write for Saturday Night Live, and he wrote my name into a couple of Saturday Night Live scripts, and I was hanging out with those guys back in the day, but I used to have just terrible anxiety about going on stage. And so, but every quarter we take our podcast and we do it live at Cap City Comedy Club, and we sell out. And Bob usually prints up a T-shirt for the event, and he'll want me over there. And people will come up and they walk. It's so weird. It's like they walk up like you record, like you're in Zeppelin, and want you to sign these shirts. And I'm like, dude, I don't want to ruin your shirt by signing it with a silver Sharpie, but on whole, it's like it's pretty amazing to me that you're able to put together any kind of art. It's artwork, even if it's a filthy podcast like we do, and have people come up and go, man, I listened to this, I listened to that, and love this part, and thank you for that. And did this really happen? Did you really, set the fire alarm off at the comedy club one night? Yeah, that's great stuff. That makes it worthwhile oftentimes.
What is the key to longevity in radio? Because I respect what you've done, where you've been at the same place for 30 years and have had top-rated ratings on your morning show. And I'm doing pretty good with my podcast, but I want to make sure that it keeps on growing. So what's some advice you have for me when it comes to longevity in this tough business where you have to grind it out each show?
Well, as I got older, we're talking, I think around 2004 or something like that, I was like pretty much phoning everything in, and I realized that I wasn't that the competition was gonna get me, and I started prepping a lot more. And I think it's just self-awareness of where you are, whether it's ratings or download numbers or what you're doing content-wise, and just always being self-aware. And the one thing I think that kept Bob and I going is we were always on the edge technologically. I had one of the main guys in Emmis called me in 2008 after I took a pay cut because everything was going belly up, and he was thanking me, and I was in the airport headed over to Ireland, and he goes, anything else that you need, man? And I'm like, well, we really desperately need an app. And he said, what's an app? And it was 2008. And I go, oh my God, a main manager doesn't know what an app is yet. And everybody else is starting to do this, starting to stream. And that goes all the way back to 1993 when we started talking. And then I came in and said, I need a television in the control room. And they're like, why do you need a television in the control room when you're doing radio? Why do you need the internet in the control room? Why did you need a camera in the control room for See You, See Me? Why? And we just, you have to know what's coming next or you'll get hit by a bus. That's basically it. And it's happening right now in our town. Uber has taken over. No one's riding cabs anymore. The cab companies are going back to the city council and whining and saying, please tax Uber like you tax us and make them do all this. If you miss technology, then you're done. I mean, and that's not just technology. Yeah. Whatever's coming in the business that you're in, if you don't have the foresight to see what's heading up the future, then you're going to lose. and that can be the attitudes of listeners. That can be what you're doing content wise. That can be what's coming in the news. That's why I don't even prep till tomorrow. Like, I won't prep until tomorrow morning, because anything I do tonight might be already old when I get up in the morning.
Now, how did you first meet Bob?
Well, I met Bob, and Bob was, when I started in '87, Bob was the promotions director, and he was there only a few months or a year or two, and he left and went to another radio station to be the promotions director. And then when the job came open for a sidekick, I was with Clark Ryan for 5 years, and he wanted to move into management and did. And he was with Intercom for a long time, and now is retired. And Bob applied, and he wasn't my choice. I mean, he convinced the bosses to come on, and we. I don't know exactly how it stuck. I mean, we were young and dumb and just kind of kept going. And then eventually we became friends. I mean, we definitely weren't friends the first couple of years, the first 2 or 3 years. We tried to be, but we didn't really mesh. And so now, we've been together so long that occasionally we get together with our families and stuff like that. And, we text and chat, and I don't see us ever having a huge fallout. We have 1 or 2 fights on a year, and we do those on the air usually. We had one big one on the podcast a couple of years ago, and I shoved him, and that's the most physical it's ever got. He's pretty good about calming down later in the day, and realizing it's not brain science. But did I just say brain science? Brain surgery. So,
what are some of the best things that Bob brings to the air if someone hasn't heard your show?
Well, Bob's the assassin. Well, Matt and I are pretty much one-liner guys. Bob waits until the right moment, and then he'll have a joke that nobody would have thought of. Bob also, it's a fun chemistry thing because Bob's very machismo. He's half Mexican, half Italian. He never cries. I've only seen him almost cry once. He really. For the first few years, he wasn't very open about his own life, and then finally he caught the bug that I have, which is, usually anything that happens in my real life ends up on the air, even when I tell myself it's not going to. And so he did that, and he was pretty honest on the air in 2008 or 9 or something like that, when he and his wife were going through a rough patch, and so he'll be the foil. There's some inside jokes, and he'll take them and run with them. He can tend to be kind of martyrish. He tends to crap on whatever big idea I have in my life that's coming up and tell me all the negatives. So it's a chemistry thing. It's just kind of, it all works, and same thing with Matt. Matt tends to, I'm the one that wants to get on the air, rant and rave and say I'm right, and he tends to always take the other side and look at the other side of things, much to my frustration. And then we have Daniel and Carissa, who are just literally, Daniel's kind of a savant who throws out random facts, and we tend to have fun with that too. So,
how long did it take until you were able to make everything work on the show once everybody was brought in? Were you able to make it work right away, or did it take a few years?
Sorry about the dog. Well, the cast now, I don't know. There's been no better. There's been several incarnations. We had other sidekicks.
Yeah.
We've had people come and go. We had Deborah, and we had Leanna, and then we had Charlie, and we've had different producers and stuff. And it's always been fun, and the show's always been somewhat successful. But there's just something about this cast. I think Matt was ready to come off the road from being a stand-up comedian because he had a baby, and he was tired of driving to Omaha in the middle of the night and staying at a horrible motel. So he's not coming back looking for his own radio show, and we just all are friends. And so this, I can't say there's a date or time where it worked. Yeah. There was a time in 2010 where our ratings were in the toilet, but we knew we were doing good radio, and it wasn't the product. So we just, and how the ratings work. I mean, it's just a fucked up system, and so we literally just kept doing good work and made some clock adjustments and some adjustments on what we were going to talk about, and and it worked, but it'll go down again, and it'll, and eventually we'll ride that until you can't ride it anymore. So,
what are some of your favorite memories out of everything you have done on the show? What are some memories that just come to your mind immediately?
Oh, Ryan, I mean, my God, I have people walk up to me all the time and go, "You remember I met you and we did that thing where we rode that tricycle," and I'll have no memory of it whatsoever. Not favorite memory, but I have to say that 9/11 still stands out, and I have a huge regret that I didn't just stay on the air that day, because I was kind of the anchor of the station, and I should have stayed on the air. We ended up leaving at about 11 o'clock in the morning. I think we stayed on until about 10:30, and we felt we needed to hand it over. So that one stands out because we were sitting with, and I'm not going to remember the actor's name, but he's got 3 names. We were about to interview the actor who went on to be nominated for the movie about the wine country. What was that one all about? Thomas Hayden Church was sitting there with us when 9/11 happened, and so I've done some acting gigs over the years and been to some film festivals and stuff, and every time I see Thomas Hayden Church, I walk up and he goes, you, 9/11. So that's one. There's been so many, fun mornings. I mean, the sexual stuff we did back in the 90s, where we were just out of control and everything was out of control, and we were having naked women in all the time and porn stars. I can remember Christy Canyon coming in, and she was super. She was the only porn star I ever just really liked as a human being. She was just a super nice person. George W. Bush, before he was president and before I grew to despise him, came in as the Rangers owner. We found that tape recently where he just popped his head in and said hello as the Texas Rangers owner. We've had so many great musicians over the years, too many to list or to count. We've had Russell Crowe. We've had William Shatner. It was a great morning. The worst guest I've ever had was Jimmy J.J. Walker. Well, no. Jimmy J.J. Walker was one of the worst. I've had worse since, but he was a total asshole. And I was trying to think of who else we've had in there, but we've had a lot of fun. And then a couple of things that weren't so fun. And that's the thing about our show, is that when something goes badly, it becomes lore for the rest of the show.
Yeah.
And it becomes a bit. So there's really no bad mornings.
When do you know when an interview is going south? Like when you had J.J. Walker there, when was the time when you could feel the vibe that this wasn't going to be the best interview?
Oh, as soon as we cracked the mics open, he came in and started ranting because it was I think he said 2 dicks and a chick, which is what we had back then, was with Deborah. You can usually tell right away that they're not in the mood for, and we tell comics all the time, like we know all the comics that are coming through usually, and we know who's going to be a good guest, and we don't have them back. We want somebody to come in and just keep rolling with us, just keep rolling with the show. I don't want to stop and do an interview with anybody. I mean, I'll do 10 minutes, and then we want to move on with the show, and you can tell. But and then there's confusing times. There's a comedian named John Evans who was filling in for Bob one day, and then somebody else was out. So it was literally me and John Evans, and we were trying to interview, what's his name? He's a half-beat poet, former musician. What's his name? Oh, man, it's the only name I haven't remembered today. The guy who was he in X or something like that? Well, anyway, we were interviewing this dude. I'll think of it as I'll tell you the story. We were interviewing this dude, and he was coming to Austin, and Henry Rollins, that's who it is. And we were talking to him on the phone, and I hate phone interviews anyway. We rarely do them anymore. If you can't come in the studio, then we can't promote your shit. So Henry Rollins is on the air, and the publicist had sent us the wrong sheet. They sent us an old PDF that had information on it that was a year old. And so we kept saying, hey, well, you're going to be on this show. And he goes, no, that was a year ago. Oh, well, hey, man, you're going to do this. He goes, nope, that's wrong, too. And you could tell he's in a bad mood. And then so John Evans said, well, you're all punk and everything like that. You should know this. You should welcome this kind of chaos or something. And that's when Henry Rollins said, punk, huh? Yeah, I've got more money and more houses than I make more money in a day than you make in 5 years, buddy. So I just said, hey, Henry. He went, what? And I just hit the button and hung up on him. So that you can tell when they're going badly.
Where do you see your show going within the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a good question. I don't know if we'll be on. I don't know. I mean, it's run a long course. I know they're talking about redoing our deal in next spring. So I guess it's another 4 years. But it'd be hard to say, next 5 to 10 years. I don't know if I want to be doing it in 10 years.
Yeah.
And, I've looked at outside stuff and what my wife is working hard and what we're going to do. And I'm, making some investments and buying some properties and stuff, and kind of seeing where that's going to be. I mean, I'd love to be, still the talk guy in Austin, and there's always a guy. You always see a guy in St. Louis that's got gray hair, and they always go to him for stuff. I guess for years here it was Cactus Pryor. I'd love to be that guy, but I just know how unpredictable the business is, and you never know when you're going to lose a boss and the new boss is going to come in and he's not going to dig your stuff or the station gets sold or whatever. So it's really hard to predict. And I'm trying, and that stuff puts the fear of God into me, but I'm trying just to live kind of day by day and just enjoying going in. I don't want to be doing, 2 shifts.
Yeah.
In 5 years. So we'll just have to see where it all goes. But I literally have to tell myself, okay, get up and let's go do it tomorrow morning and have fun, because in this business, you can drive yourself absolutely crazy, and I have, worrying about the future. So,
what was it like when you and Bob found out that you would be making it into the Texas Radio Hall of Fame? How much of an honor was that?
It was a great honor. We make jokes about it, because the guys on the Texas Radio Hall of Fame, Josh Holstead has it now, and he works really hard on it. But the guy before him was an older dude who didn't have a very good website and didn't, and wasn't really super organized. It's not an actual hall; it's just an online thing, and they have an event every year. There's times when I look at it like it's it's just a thing on the web, and then there's other times where I go, well, no, man, those broadcasters voted you in. So it's kind of cool. It's not one of those things I've sat and pondered about being amazing.
Yeah.
It makes me feel old, but I think if looking back on it, I'm glad. I think of all those people that I did work with in Tyler, Texas, and Lubbock, Texas, and Longview before I came to Austin. And, I was just a kid. When you look back and you go, I was just that kid that was annoying and had a horrible voice and was asking all these questions. And I had a guy call me about 4 years ago, and his name was Gary Safley, and that wasn't the name he used on the air. We worked together at a station called KTYL in Tyler, Texas, and Gary was a good guy, and neither one of us were great radio disc jockeys. And he was on the phone with me, and he had sent me some pictures. He had found me through somebody, and he was like, dude, you're the guy. You made it. Dude, you made it. And, you don't ever feel like you've made it, and I don't feel like I've made it. I've made a living, and I'm able to put food on the table for my family. And then it wasn't 6 months later, maybe 8 months later, I got a note from a guy named Pat O'Brien, who had replaced me at that radio station in Morning Drive. And he said, hey, man, did you hear about Gary? And I go, no. And Gary had been killed in a car wreck. And I got this just weird, I'm getting chills now, just this weird, creepy thing, because I'm always questioning what I've done in my life. Did I do enough? I wanted to be an actor. I've done a few movies here and there, and but I just stayed in radio. Was I just lazy or anything? And it was this thing where this guy had just popped into my life, called me, laid out these compliments, and then he loses his life. And it really made me stop and take stock for a while and go, well, maybe I did. Maybe there's something to hang my hat on there, And my wife has to tell me all the time, because she says you never take credit for how many people love you, dude. You have no idea. Because I get down, dude. I mean, I can get down. I can get really low and depressed. And I think that goes back to the childhood thing, and that's why we're in show business. But that thing with Gary Safley really kind of that kind of meant more to me than, any kind of award. It was a dude that you had. I was 18 years old when I was working with that guy, and for him to call up and act like you were the big deal, it obviously meant something to him. So that was a cool thing.
And now, before I let you go, Dale, what is the future of radio? What do you think?
Man, Ryan, I don't know about, it just depends on who. I think Emmis has some great managers who are on the ball now trying to get Next Radio going. And I think when you talk, I think the problem with any kind of giant corporation is the guys running the corporation always think they know more than the worker bees. And Unfortunately, that's not always true. The worker bees know. I think there will always be a need for content. There will always be a need for local content. It's just a question of, will you be able to make a living doing that local content? And I'm hoping you will. Now, the good news is, if I'm reading correctly, I've been reading an article where advertisers are now coming back to endorsers. I know all my live spots are sold out. They're finding that these companies actually see product move when it's done through a personality they trust. And there's also was an article a couple of weeks ago about how millennials are now listening to the radio again to find new music and to listen to talk personalities. I forget exactly what the numbers were. So, radio's been – they've tried to kill radio since television came out.
Yeah.
They've tried to kill it off several times. They tried to kill it off when MTV came out. Video killed the radio star. That was an actual song. And they literally talked about the death of radio. They tried to kill it when high def and then, of course, when the internet, Spotify, and all that comes off. I listen to Apple Music all the time. I'm not a Spotify guy, but I did Apple Music. I think it's way cool to listen to the music I grew up listening to in high school or to find something new. But I always find my finger going back over and hitting either Sirius or hitting the FM signal. And I think there's, I think it's the rumors of radio's death have long been over-exaggerated.
And now, where can people find your work online and on the radio?
Well, let's see. I've got the radio show, Dudley and Bob and Matt, is 93.7 FM, and that streams at klbjfm.com. We have a podcast that we do called The Sideshow, which is free for 30 days, and that's at Dudley and Bob Land, dudleyandbobland.com, like an amusement park. You can see me in the movie Bernie with Jack Black. There was 2 scenes. It got edited down to 1, and that's pretty much it. And then I'm on 590 AM, which is News Radio KOBJ. That's News Radio KOBJ, and that is on from 2 to 3 in the afternoon Central Time, which I guess would be 3 to 4 your time.
Well, Dale, thank you so much for coming on Happy Hour, man. I mean, this is an absolute honor. I used to go to the library when I was in middle school and look up radio shows, so I've been listening to you probably since 2009. So to have you call into my show was an absolute honor.
Well, anytime, buddy, and let me know anything I can ever do for you, and I'll try to do it. I'm always available. Now you got my number and you got my email, so just let me know. And best of luck to you, man. Hang in there.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dale, and have a good rest of the day.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, bye. And that was Dale Dudley from the legendary Dudley and Bob Show on KLBJ-FM. I usually end every interview that I have with these legendary hosts by saying, oh, they're one of my influences, they're a show I like. But truly, I mean it when I say Dale Dudley is one of the guys I look up to. I really look up to guys who are able to reinvent themselves and they don't rely on being bullies and on being douchebags to make content on air. And I love the fact that he just keeps doing his thing and he has run that market for the past 30 years. My dad was in high school when he began radio. My mom was in nursing school. He has been at it forever. So to have him even think about coming on Happy Hour is an absolute honor. This has been Happy Hour. I am your host, Ryan Hoppy, saying peace out.
Happy Hour. Happy Hour.
This is an official broadcast of Hoppy Radio. For more info, check out hoppyradio.com and hoppysworld.com.